Hello, friends. Welcome back. I'm Christina, the manager of the Pacific Beach Library. Thank you for joining me today for day 10, day 10 of our read along together of A Room with a View. We're reading chapter 12 today, and thought we'd start out by making some tea. Let's see. Today's tea is the bourbon vanilla from Point Loma Teas. It's a loose leaf tea. I was drinking a lot of it during our read along of the Count of Monte Cristo because it was set during the bourbon period of France, and of course with the bourbon tea, why not? But yeah, so this one, if you weren't around when we were reading that one, this one's a really good tea. It's made of rooibos, calendula petals, almond slices, and vanilla. Very sweet, very intense, and wonderful. Oh, I probably show you. It has like a golden red. I would say red with a bit of orange to it. It pours out really beautifully. Let's see. And this one, the vanilla fragrance is very strong. Hi, how are you guys doing today? I hope everyone that's here is having a wonderful day. My day has been really good. Just some days, things are just firing along really nicely, and today has been very fun. And so I'm glad to get to share the day with you guys. Let's see. Oh, I did want to mention something though. Yesterday, shortly after we ended our reading, I remembered that we are getting relatively close to the end of this book. We've got just about 2 weeks left. And so what I want to do is open up the voting so that way we can start selecting our next book. So for the next week, we'll go ahead and take nominations and votes on what we should read next. And then we'll select our next book. I believe I wrote something on the Facebook page. I can't remember if I said we'd choose next Monday or Tuesday. We'll choose one of those days early next week, and we'll select our next title to read together. But I encourage you, if you can, please go to our Facebook page. There's a poll that I created. You can add new options, so you can nominate a title that way by just adding a new line to the poll. And then you should be able to also vote on any of the options that are already there. If there's any problem with it, because this is our first time doing the voting this way, please let me know and we'll try to figure it out. But you should be able to add titles to the poll. My only caveat is please choose things that are from the public domain. That means published in 1924 or prior. Although January 1st is going to be Public Domain Day, which means that starting next year in January 1st, anything published in 1925 or after is up for game, and so up for grabs. And so we'll be able to have those in our possible stable of books to read together as well. So please go ahead and nominate titles, vote for them, and we can select our next book to read together after we complete A Room with a View. Let's talk a little bit about what we read yesterday. We read 2 chapters in A Room with a View. Chapter 10 was entitled Cecil as a Humorist, and I will just start out by saying, I keep calling him Cecil because I'm used to that. Cecil is a humorist. He obviously thinks he's funnier than Lucy does. Which is unfortunate. Let's see. So Cecil is a humorist. Basically starts out with a little bit discussing how Italy changed their perspectives, their individual perspectives on things. And it says how when Lucy went to Italy, she started to see that, her senses expanded. She felt that there was no one whom she might not get to like, that social barriers were irremovable, doubtless, but not particularly high. You jump over them, just as you jump into a peasant's olive cart, and he is glad to see you. And she returned with new eyes. Cecil, on the other hand, he also returned with new eyes, but Italy had quickened him not to tolerance but to irritation. He saw that the local society was narrow, but instead of saying, "Does that matter very much?" he rebelled and tried to substitute for it the society that he called broad. And so we see again a difference in opinion and how they approach the world. And again, it kind of goes back to the idea too of how he sees Lucy as this work of art, and that's why he can appreciate her now and love her and welcome her into this world, because he sees her as better than the world in which she's inhabiting, this kind of provincial world of Windy Corner and Summer Street, I think it's called. Hey, ooh, sorry, I saw that Pam is drinking Earl Grey. I love that tea. Let's see. So it starts out, so once we've set that scene, the chapter continues with Lucy out on the lawn playing a game with her brother Freddie, Minnie Beebe, the niece of Mr. Beebe the Reverend. Her mother is nearby, and they're talking, and her brother Freddie mentions that he heard that Sir Harry Otway had rented out Sissy Villa, and that and Lucy basically says, well, yes, it's going to go to the Allen sisters, Miss Catherine and Miss Teresa, or Teresa. And Freddie says, oh, no, no, it's something else. It's a different name. And eventually comes around to saying, it's a father and son named Emerson. And she's like, no, it can't be them. And so Lucy is just shocked about it, but she tells herself, it can't be them. It can't be them. And so she's trying to gently find out more information. She's obviously disappointed. And it's interesting, too, because Mr. Beebe is trying to help. And basically Freddie says, well, they're not just any old people, they're friends of Cecil's. And so if Cecil was the one who introduced them, well, they must be quite stuffy just like that too. And so, and she realizes that Cecil's Emerson's, like, they can't possibly be the same ones that she knew. At which point Mr. Beebe tries to help, because he's trying to divert the conversation away from the consternation that he can tell that Lucy is feeling. And so he starts talking about these Emersons that they met, these Emersons that they encountered at the Pensione Bertolini. And Lucy is just like, you can tell she's dying inside, hearing him talking more and more about these Emersons that she's hoping desperately will not be the new tenants nearby in Sissy Villa. Finally, she says she must go talk to Cecil. By the way, there's also a notable line in here too, where she had in an earlier chapter, she had referred to the Emerson family, and she referred to Mr. Eager, the Reverend Mr. Eager, saying that Mr. Emerson had pretty much murdered his wife in the eyes of God. And she had told the story, and then she backtracked a little bit and said, and it was some people whose last name was Harris. And so in this chapter, it comes back, and that was the one too, that after she had shared the kiss with Cecil, she says, I was mistaken. Those people's name was not Harris. That family's name was Emerson. Again, revealing to us that she was thinking about George Emerson and their kiss. But she never corrected it with her mother. And so her mother, during this conversation about the Emersons who might be coming in, and Mr. Beebe, as he's talking about these people they met in Italy, he mentions the thing about, the other reverend had said he pretty much murdered his wife. Mrs. Honeychurch then says, what? Another gentleman in Italy that murdered his wife? That's two of them? That other one must be, what were their names? Oh, it was Harris. And when she shouts this out, Lucy is reminded that she had told a lie and had not put it right. Such a senseless lie too, yet it shattered her nerves and made her connect these Emersons, friend of Cecil's, with a pair of nondescript tourists. And Forster also writes, hitherto truth had come to her naturally. She saw that for the future she must be more vigilant and be absolutely truthful, with a question mark. Well, at all events, she must not tell lies. I emphasize this because we are going to encounter so many more lies later on in the book, and it's delightful. But here it is, Lucy first realizing that she has now trod onto the path of being a liar. And we'll see how far she goes with this. So I just thought that was great. So Lucy does confront Cecil. He says that, he's actually not friends with these Emersons. He met them in the gallery. They were looking at the Italian paintings, and he thought they were rather boorish, and so he thought it would be amusing, and basically scoring off Sir Harry to bring them in. And she's like, no, you make it sound like you've won something against Sir Harry, but really I'm the one you hurt in this transaction, because I'm the one who was working so hard to get the Allens there, the Allen sisters, and you've made me look ridiculous. And so she's upset with him. He's noting that she has a bit of a temper, but he's also feeling rather proud of himself for having a sense of humor and for doing something he finds to be amusing. So the next chapter, chapter 11, was called In Mrs. Vyse's Well-Appointed Flat. So Mrs. Vyse is the mother of Cecil. She has an apartment or a flat in London, and she invites Cecil and Mrs. Vyse invite Lucy to come stay for a while at the mother's flat in London. Lucy goes, and while she's there, she receives a letter from her cousin Charlotte, who had been her chaperone in Italy. And Charlotte says that she has heard from her friend Miss Lavish, the lady author who had been staying with them at the Pension Bertolini, and that Miss Lavish had been bicycling near Lucy's neighborhood, and that she had seen Mr. Emerson had moved into the neighborhood, and she was shocked. Charlotte then comes back and says, Lucy, it's just terrible. You need to make a clean breast of it. You need to admit what happened to your mother, to your brother, to Mr. Vyse, everybody. You have to stop Mr. Emerson from doing anything that could basically destroy your reputation, and you have to get ahead of it by by talking about it first before, the story gets out in a different way. And Lucy basically, I love too that the letter ends with, "Believe me, your anxious and loving cousin, Charlotte." Lucy writes back to her, "Dear Charlotte," and she says, "Thank you very much for the warning. I knew Mr. Emerson was here. You have nothing to worry about. I've never said a thing, and I don't think he would talk about it either, but I promised you on your behalf, or your behest, that I would never tell anyone about it because I didn't want to, we didn't want to make you look bad as a chaperone, so I'm not going to say anything to my mom now. I'm not saying anything to anybody, and that's it." She ends it with, "Yours affectionately, L.M. Honeychurch," which I find to be not super affectionate. So I just thought that was kind of fun. These little touches are just fabulous. So the visit, she stays 10 additional days staying with the Vises at the flat. And at one of the evenings, they show us this scene where they've invited other people to come over. They're having like a musicale evening. And so they invite Lucy to play the piano. And so she plays Schumann. Schumann or Schumann? I feel like I've heard it pronounced both ways, and I know I said it both ways yesterday. So if anyone knows, is it Schumann or Schumann? Really feel like I've heard both. But either way, Sissel invites her to play Beethoven, which we know gets Lucy riled up. And she says, no, this is not a night for Beethoven. And she plays more Schumann. And so afterwards, Sissel is so impressed by how Lucy had conveyed herself and the musical choices she'd made and how it had set the tone for the evening and basically her sophistication. He thinks that she is worthy of him. Mrs. Vyse also is saying Lucy is becoming wonderful. She's getting rid of that Honeychurch taint, being rather common, talking with the servants and things like that, and that Lucy is becoming more refined. And he says she has always, her music was always refined. Her music was always fabulous. And she, he's like, she is so wonderful. And Mrs. Vyse keeps saying, just make her one of us. Marry her as soon as you can. Marry her in January. She's the one. And so the chapter ends with Lucy having a nightmare. Mrs. Vyse coming in and encountering her and saying, "You should have heard us talking about you, dear. He admires you more than ever. Dream of that." And so I can't help but to wonder if the nightmare she was experiencing was thinking of being with Sissel, or the nightmare of George Emerson and that past incident derailing her time with Sissel. Whew, okay, or maybe in something else totally unrelated, but considering the way the book is, I think one of those two. All right, so now, today we have just one chapter, and again, Forster is very amusing. He has another beautifully succinct and descriptive chapter. Chapter 12 is entitled 12th Chapter. All right, 12th chapter indeed. It was a Saturday afternoon, gay and brilliant after abundant rains, and the spirit of youth dwelt in it, though the season was now autumn. All that was gracious triumphed. As the motor cars passed through Summer Street, they raised only a little dust, and their stench was soon dispersed by the wind and replaced by the scent of the wet birches or of the pines. Mr. Beebe, at leisure for life's amenities, leant over his rectory gate. Freddie leant by him, smoking a pendant pipe. "Suppose we go and hinder those new people opposite for a little." "They might amuse you." Freddie, whom his fellow creatures never amused, suggested that the new people might be feeling a bit busy, and so on, since they had only just moved in. "I suggested we should hinder them," said Mr. Beebe. "They are worth it." Unlatching the gate, he sauntered over the triangular green to Sissy Villa. "Hello!" he cried, shouting in at the open door, through which much squalor was visible. A grave voice replied, "Hello." "I've brought someone to see you. I'll be down in a minute." The passage was blocked by a wardrobe, which the removal men had failed to carry up the stairs. Mr. Beebe edged round it with difficulty. The sitting room itself was blocked with books. "Are these people great readers?" Freddie whispered. "Are they that sort?" "I fancy they know how to read. A rare accomplishment." "What have they got?" "Byron." "Exactly." "A Shropshire lad." "Never heard of it." "The Way of All Flesh." "Never heard of it." "Gibbon." "Hello, dear George reads German." Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, and so we go on. Well, I suppose your generation knows its own business, Honeychurch. Mr. Beebe, look at that, said Freddie in awestruck tones. On the cornice of the wardrobe, the hand of an amateur had painted this inscription: Mistrust all enterprises that require new clothes. I know. Isn't it jolly? I like that. I'm certain that's the old man's doing. How very odd of him. Surely you agree. But Freddie was his mother's son, and felt that one ought not to go on spoiling the furniture. Pictures, the clergyman continued, scrambling about the room. Giotto. They got that at Florence, I'll be bound. The same as Lucy's got. Oh, by the by, did Miss Honeychurch enjoy London? Yes, she came back yesterday. I suppose she had a good time? Yes, very, said Freddie, taking up a book. She and Cecil are thicker than ever. That's good hearing. I wish I wasn't such a fool, Mr. Beebe. Mr. Beebe ignored the remark. Lucy used to be nearly as stupid as I am, but it'll be very different now, Mother thinks. She will read all kinds of books. So will you. Only medical books, not books that you can talk about afterwards. Cecil is teaching Lucy Italian, and he says her playing is wonderful. There are all kinds of things in it that we have never noticed. Cecil says, "What on earth are those people doing upstairs? Emerson, we think we'll come another time." George ran downstairs and pushed them into the room without speaking. Let me introduce Mr. Honeychurch, a neighbor. Then Freddie hurled one of the thunderbolts of youth. Perhaps he was shy, perhaps he was friendly, or perhaps he thought that George's face wanted washing. At all events, he greeted him with, "How do you do? Come and have a bathe." "Oh, all right," said George, impassive. Mr. Beebe was highly entertained. How do you do? How do you do? Come and have a bathe, he chuckled. That's the best conversational opening I've ever heard. But I'm afraid it will only act between men. Can you picture a lady who has been introduced to another lady by a third lady, opening civilities with, "How do you do? Come and have a bathe?" And yet you will tell me that the sexes are equal. I tell you that they shall be, said Mr. Emerson, who had been slowly descending the stairs. Good afternoon, Mr. Beebe. I tell you they shall be comrades, and George thinks the same. We are to raise ladies to our level? The clergyman inquired. The Garden of Eden, pursued Mr. Emerson, still descending, which you place in the past, is really yet to come. We shall enter it when we no longer despise our bodies. Mr. Beebe disclaimed placing the Garden of Eden anywhere. In this, not in other things, we men are ahead. We despise the body less than women do, but not until we are comrades shall we enter the garden. I say, what about this bathe? Murmured Freddie, appalled at the mass of philosophy that was approaching him. I believed in a return to nature once, but how can we return to nature when we have never been with her? Today I believe that we must discover nature. After many conquests, we shall attain simplicity. It is our heritage. Let me introduce Mr. Honeychurch, whose sister you will remember at Florence. How do you do? Very good to see you, and that you are taking George for a bathe. Very glad to hear that your sister is going to marry. Marriage is a duty. I am sure that she will be happy, for we know Mr. Vyse too. He has been most kind. He met us by chance in the National Gallery, and arranged everything about this delightful house. Though I hope I have not vexed Sir Harry Otway. I have met so few liberal landowners, and I was anxious to compare his attitude towards the game laws with the conservative attitude. Ah, this wind! You do well to bathe. Yours is a glorious country, Honeychurch. Not a bit, mumbled Freddie. I must, that is to say, I have to, have the pleasure of calling on you later on, my mother says, I hope. Call, my lad! Who taught us that drawing-room twaddle? Call on your grandmother. Listen to the wind among the pines. Yours is a glorious country. Mr. Beebe came to the rescue. Mr. Emerson, he will call. I shall call. You or your son will return our calls before 10 days have elapsed. I trust that you have realized about the 10 days interval. It does not count that I helped you with the stare eyes yesterday. It does not count that they are going to bathe this afternoon. Yes. Go and bathe, George. Why do you dawdle talking? Bring them back to tea. Bring back some milk, cakes, honey. The change will do you good. George has been working very hard at his office. I can't believe he's well. George bowed his head, dusty and somber, exhaling the peculiar smell of one who has handled furniture. Do you really want this bathe? Freddie asked him. It is only a pond, don't you know? I dare say you are used to something better. Yes, I have said yes already. Mr. Beebe felt bound to assist his young friend, and led the way out of the house and into the pine woods. How glorious it was! For a little time the voice of old Mr. Emerson pursued them, dispensing good wishes and philosophy. It ceased, and they only heard the fair wind blowing the bracken and the trees. Mr. Beebe, who could be silent, but who could not bear silence, was compelled to chatter, since the expedition looked like a failure, and neither of his companions would utter a word. He spoke of Florence. George attended gravely, assenting or dissenting, with slight but determined gestures that were as inexplicable as the motions of the tree-tops above their heads. And what a coincidence that you should meet Mr. Vyse. Did you realize that you would find all the Pension Bertolini down here? I did not. Miss Lavish told me. When I was a young man, I always meant to write a history of coincidence. No enthusiasm. Though, as a matter of fact, coincidences are much rarer than we suppose. For example, it isn't purely coincidentality that you are here now, when one comes to reflect. To his relief, George began to talk. It is. I have reflected. It is fate. Everything is fate. We are flung together by fate, drawn apart by fate, flung together, drawn apart. The 12 winds blow us, we settle nothing. You have not reflected at all, rapped the clergyman. Let me give you a useful tip, Emerson. Attribute nothing to fate. Don't say, I didn't do this, for you did it, 10-1. Now, I'll cross-question you. Where did you first meet Miss Honeychurch and myself? Italy. And where did you meet Mr. Vyse, who is going to marry Miss Honeychurch? National Gallery. Looking at Italian art. There you are, and yet you talk of coincidence and fate. You naturally seek out things Italian, and so do we and our friends. This narrows the field immeasurably, and we meet again in it. It is fate that I am here, persisted George, but you can call it Italy if it makes you less unhappy. Mr. Beebe slid away from such heavy treatment of the subject, but he was infinitely tolerant of the young, and had no desire to snub George. And so for this and for other reasons, my history of coincidence is still to write. Silence. Wishing to round off the episode, he added, We are all so glad that you have come. Silence. Here we are, called Freddie. Oh, good, exclaimed Mr. Beebe, mopping his brow. In there's the pond. I wish it was bigger, he added apologetically. They climbed down a slippery bank of pine needles. There lay the pond, set in its little alp of green. Only a pond, but large enough to contain the human body and pure enough to reflect the sky. On account of the rains, the waters had flooded the surrounding grass, which showed like a beautiful emerald path, tempting the feet towards the central pool. It's distinctly successful as ponds go, said Mr. Beebe. No apologies are necessary for the pond. George sat down where the ground was dry, and drearily unlaced his boots. Aren't those masses of willow herb splendid? I love willow herb in seed. What's the name of this aromatic plant? No one knew, or seemed to care. These abrupt changes of vegetation, this little spongeous tract of water plants, and on either side of it all the growths are tough or brittle, heather, bracken, hurts, pines. Very charming, very charming. Mr. Beebe, aren't you bathing? Called Freddie as he stripped himself. Mr. Beebe thought he was not. Water's wonderful, cried Freddie, prancing in. Water's water, murmured George. Wetting his hair first, a sure sign of apathy, he followed Freddie into the divine, as indifferent as if he were a statue, and the pond a pail of soapsuds. It was necessary to use his muscles. It was necessary to keep clean. Mr. Beebe watched them, and watched the seeds of the willow herb dance chorically above their heads. Apoo-shoo! 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 Went Freddie, swimming for 2 strokes in either direction, and then becoming involved in reeds or mud. Is it worth it? Asked the other, Michelangelesque on the flooded margin. The bank broke away, and he fell into the pool before he had weighed the question properly. Poof! I've swallowed a pollywog. Mr. Beebe, water's wonderful. Water's simply ripping. Water's not so bad, said George, reappearing from his plunge and sputtering at the sun. Water's wonderful, Mr. Beebe. Do! Apoo-shoo! Coof! Mr. Beebe, who was hot and who always acquiesced where possible, looked around him. He could detect no parishioners except the pine trees, rising up steeply on all sides, and gesturing to each other against the blue. How glorious it was! The world of motor cars and rural deans receded illimitably. Water, sky, evergreens, a wind, these things not even the seasons can touch, and surely they lie beyond the intrusion of man. I may as well wash too, and soon his garments made a 3rd little pile on the sward, and he too asserted the wonder of the water. It was ordinary water, nor was there very much of it, and as Freddie had said, it reminded one of swimming in a salad. 3 gentlemen rotated in the pool breast high, after the fashion of the nymphs in Götterdammerung. But either because the rains had given a freshness, or because the sun was shedding a most glorious heat, or because 2 of the gentlemen were young in years, and the 3rd young in spirit, for some reason or other a change came over them, and they forgot Italy and botany and fate. They began to play. Mr. Beebe and Freddie splashed each other. A little deferentially, they splashed George. He was quiet. They feared they had offended him. Then all the forces of youth burst out. He smiled, flung himself at them, splashed them, ducked them, kicked them, muddied them, and drove them out of the pool. Race you round it then, cried Freddie, and they raced in the sunshine, and George took a short cut and dirtied his shins and had to bathe a 2nd time. Then Mr. Beebe consented to run. A memorable sight. They ran to get dry. They bathed to get cool. They played at being Indians in the willow herbs and in the bracken. They bathed to get clean. And all the time 3 little bundles lay discreetly on the sward, proclaiming, No, we are what matters. Without us shall no enterprise begin. To us shall all flesh turn in the end. A try! A try! Yelled Freddie, snatching up George's bundle and placing it beside an imaginary goal-post. Soccer rules, George retorted, scattering Freddie's bundle with a kick. Goal! Goal! Pass! Take care my watch, cried Mr. Beebe. Clothes flew in all directions. Take care my hat! No, that's enough, Freddie. Dress now. No, I say. But the 2 young men were delirious. Away they twinkled into the trees, Freddie with a clerical waistcoat under his arm, George with a wide-awake hat on his dripping hair. That'll do, shouted Mr. Beebe, remembering that after all he was in his own parish. Then his voice changed as if every pine tree was a rural dean. Hi! Steady on! I see people coming, you fellows! Yells and widening circles over the dappled earth. Hi! Hi! Ladies! Neither George nor Freddie was truly refined. Still, they did not hear Mr. Beebe's last warning, or they would have avoided Mrs. Honeychurch, Cecil, and Lucy, who were walking down to call on old Mrs. Butterworth. Freddie dropped the waistcoat at their feet and dashed into some bracken. George whooped in their faces, turned, and scudded away down the path to the pond, still clad in Mr. Beebe's hat. Gracious alive! cried Mrs. Honeychurch. Who ever were those unfortunate people? Oh, dears, look away! And poor Mr. Beebe, too! Whatever has happened? Come this way immediately, commanded Cecil, who always felt that he must lead women, though he knew not whither, and protect them, though he knew not against what. He led them now towards the bracken, where Freddie sat concealed. Oh, poor Mr. Beebe! Was that his waistcoat we left in the path? Cecil, Mr. Beebe's waistcoat. No business of ours, said Cecil, glancing at Lucy, who was all parasol, and evidently minded. I fancy Mr. Beebe jumped back into the pond. This way, please, Mrs. Honeychurch. This way. They followed him up the bank, attempting the tense yet nonchalant expression that is suitable for ladies on such occasions. Well, I can't help it, said a voice close ahead, and Freddie reared a freckled face and a pair of snowy shoulders out of the fronds. I can't be trodden on, can I? Goodness gracious me, dear, so it's you. What miserable management! Why not have a comfortable bath at home, with hot and cold laid on? Look here, mother, a fellow must wash, and a fellow's got to dry, and if another fellow... Dear, no doubt you're right as usual, but you are in no position to argue. Come, Lucy. They turned. Oh, look! Don't look! Oh, poor Mr. Beebe! How unfortunate again! For Mr. Beebe was just crawling out of the pond on whose surface garments of an intimate nature did float, while George, the world-weary George, shouted to Freddie that he had hooked a fish. And me, I've swallowed one, answered he of the bracken. I've swallowed a pollywog. It wriggleth in my tummy. I shall die. Emerson, you beast, you've got on my bags. Hush, dear, said Mrs. Honeychurch, who found it impossible to remain shocked. And do be sure you dry yourselves thoroughly first. All these colds come of not drying thoroughly. Mother, do come away, said Lucy. Oh, for goodness sake, do come. Hello, cried George, so that again the ladies stopped. He regarded himself as dressed. Barefoot, bare-chested, radiant and personable against the shadowy woods, he called, Hello, Miss Honeychurch. Hello, Miss Honeychurch. Oh, no, sorry. Bow, Lucy, better bow. Whatever it is, I shall bow. And Miss Honeychurch bowed. That evening and all that night the water ran away. On the morrow the pool had shrunk to its old size and lost its glory. It had been a call to the blood and to the relaxed will, a passing benediction whose influence did not pass, a holiness, a spell, a momentary chalice for youth. That concludes the 12th chapter. That was the scene I was hoping we would get to this week. It's just, I find it so charming and so delightful. That idea, too, that they were getting ready to go take a bathe, like basically go skinny dipping in the pond down the way, and yet they still had a very serious conversation with the Reverend Mr. Beebe and Freddie, reminding the Emersons that they must play formal calls upon them and that the Emersons must return those calls within 10 days. So even though, again, they've decided, they're going to share this intimacy, there's still these social rules that must be followed. And then when they go out and they take the bathe in the pond, and then joined by Mr. Beebe, they relax those rules, they're having fun, and then Cecil and the two ladies come by. It's a really fun scene. It was great in the book, too. For those of you who have seen the movie, hilarious. It's really well done as well. So thank you very much. There's just a real lightness to it. This idea of them just running around the pond and just happy and innocent, and it's very sweet. Okay, so I hope you've enjoyed this chapter. It is one of the funnier chapters in the book, I think. Yeah. So Thank you again. I'm going to end with reminding you to please, please, please go vote, nominate some books that you might like to read next month when we finish this one. Like I said, I'm pretty sure we're going to wrap this up on the last day of November, which is Monday the 30th. And so that way we'll be able to start in December with a brand new book to read. And so please go ahead and nominate some titles that you might be interested in reading. And or if you see something that's already been nominated that looks good to you, give it a vote. We'll do a drawing next week from the top vote getters. All right. Take care, friends. Hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye.